In this unit, we're going to be talking about DNA and protein synthesis. DNA and protein synthesis is something that I enjoy, and to the degree that we're going to be discussing it, you should probably enjoy it too. A lot of this you will probably already know from just different things that you have heard about, different things we have mentioned and discussed, not just in this class, but just over the years. So, what is genetics is the first thing that you need to understand. Genetics is the science that studies how characteristics or traits get passed from parent to offspring. This is called inheritance. So you need to make sure that you understand what genetics is. It's how you are you and how I am me, and it's why you look like you do, how you act like you, or why you act like you do, how easily you learn and not learn, how funny you are, how serious you are, how emotional you are. Now, while not all of this is determined by things from inside of us, some of these are determined from outside things, but the things that are inside of us that we inherit from our parents are called genetics. It also comes from your grandparents. Maybe you don't act like your mother or your father, but your grandparents, or you don't look like your mother or your father, but somebody else in your ancestry line. This is all genetics. What is DNA? Well, your DNA is what helps determine your genetics. Your DNA is what is the molecule that stores your genetic information. So your DNA was discovered back in the 1920s. What does DNA stand for? It's deoxyribonucleic acid. So you need to be able to say, if somebody says, what is a DNA? Then you can say deoxyribonucleic acid. Maybe you don't know how to spell it. Maybe you can just recognize it as a word, but if there are answer choices given, you should be able to identify what it actually stands for. So DNA is made up of three different parts. There, the three different parts that come together are nucleotides. And the nucleotides are made up of a carbon sugar, a phosphate group, and a nitrogen base. So your carbon sugar is called a deoxyribose, and then your phosphate group, we'll talk about how to identify that. And your nitrogen base, what we're going to be looking at the most, is made up of adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. You need to make sure that you know those very well and probably know how to spell them, because we're going to be talking about those quite a bit. So what does a DNA look like? There was this person, a scientist, that really studied how DNA came about. What does it look like? How is it made up? What does it do? Edwin Chargaff. Edwin Chargaff determined that the amounts of adenine and thymine were equal to the amounts of cytosine and guanine. So when you look at this, this says your A is equal to your T and your G is equal to your C. And the A is the beginning, the first letter of adenine, T is thymine, and then you can keep going from there. You need to make sure that you understand that the A and the T pair up and the G and the C pair up, and then what does the A, T, G, C stand for? Chargaff now knows that after he studied them a lot, that the genetic code is what actually made these come to be. And we look at that. Genetic code is when it pairs up, and that's called a universal code. So the universal code is the pairing up of the A and the T and the G and the C. Rosalind Franklin used X-rays to show that two DNA strands were twisted. We're going to talk about this here in just a second. That is not just, sometimes when you see a picture, it looks like a ladder. And so it's not just a single step ladder like you push up against a building or that comes off of the fire trucks, right? These are a twisted ladder, and that's called a double helix ladder. The double helix was discovered by Francis Crick and James Watson. You'll hear a lot about Crick and Watson as we talk about DNA and as you read about DNA. This is a picture right here of the double helix strand, and it shows that the adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine are actually paired up to make the rungs of the ladder, and the rungs are like the different steps. But notice the double helix right there. It's important to know that The sides of the ladders are composed of alternating deoxyribose sugar and phosphate groups. So the side is the deoxyribose sugar and the phosphate groups. It's commonly known as the sugar phosphate backbone. But when you look at the rungs of the ladder, which are the steps that I mentioned, these are the nitrogen bases, which is your A and T and C and G. So thanks to how these scientists come up and studied all of this, and this is like a years and years and years of process of looking and trial and error and scientific method. Like what is your hypothesis? What do you think is going to happen? What actually happens? And then going back and starting all over and readjusting based on the results that you get. But based on all of the studies that these scientists have done, we learned about genetic code and the base pairing. So base pairing are your nitrogen bases where your adenine and thymine come together and your guanine and your cytosine. We call that complementary. It's the complementary code. So what is a gene? A gene is a segment of DNA that codes for a protein. So like when a protein is going to be produced, and if you remember when we talked about, the different functions of the protein, about being the carrier, being the builder, being all the different things that proteins do, for the protein to know what it's going to do, the different segments of DNA coming together is what actually tells the protein, this is what you're going to do. This is going to be your hair color. This is going to be your eye color. This is going to be your height. So in summary, the DNA is the molecule that stores genetic information for cells. It is shaped like a double helix, which is the twisting ladder with the bases, so the nitrogen bases on the inside, and these match in pairs with the A, the T, the C, and the G, and sections of DNA are called genes. We have two more topics that we're going to talk about that you can find on a different video. Make sure you know this frontwards, backwards thoroughly, and that if you have any questions, you make sure you let me know.